Maybe that's why my grandfather, like so many Chinese in America in the early 20th century, they chose, consciously or subconsciously, to become permanent outsiders through opium. See, they never expected to be accepted here in the United States of America.
My name is Alvin Eng. I grew up in Flushing, Queens, and I'm a playwright, an author, a musician, and educator. My family's from Toisan. My parents had an arranged marriage. And so that was totally growing up when I did, like in the 1970s. It was like going back to a home that was from a different century, because in the 1970s in America, in New York City, there was massive social and cultural changes going on. So it was very, very bizarre to be navigating that. And it was tough. Like there was a lot of racism. Like people would open. My parents had a Chinese hand laundry, and back then people used to open the door and just yell all sorts of racial epithets. And so it was a tough time. And only one of my parents spoke English, and that made me really feel very different and isolated in Flushing. Started happening like in the 1980s. So by the time I was getting ready to go to college, it was bizarre. For the first time in my life, suddenly, almost everyone in Flushing looked like me, but because I refused to learn to speak Chinese, I couldn't communicate with too many of them, because a lot of them were immigrants who were not fluent in English. So that taught me a big lesson about assimilation and immigration in America. So I always had that outsider status, but luckily, I guess that outsider status in the arts was, at least at that time, primarily expressed through rock and roll. My older brothers all played rock and roll too, so there was always a rock and roll band in our garage. So I was exposed to it as a very young kid. Rock, 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 high school. And then luckily by the time I was in high school, that was the late 70s and the punk rock era. All of us who felt like misfits, like myself, all of a sudden we fit in somewhere. That gave me the impetus to cross the line, not just be a listener and a fan, but to be an arts participant. It meant a lot to me then that all of a sudden, it didn't matter that we were the only Asian family around, and I stood out in that way. Suddenly, I had a peer group, I had a community group. Back then, going to see rock and roll and just live music, you didn't have a music video in your head. So in that way, earlier rock and roll was really, on stage, was a form of theater. They were creating their identity and their legacy, if you will, on stage. So that led me to love theater. Tommy, can you hear me? Before it was a Broadway musical, The Who did this rock opera called Tommy. And that was the first record I listened to, and that really hit me, because he felt very isolated and couldn't fit in anywhere either. And also the idea of a narrative and a dramatic narrative leading to playwriting. The playwright David Henry Wong, he changed my life. He's a pioneer. He's a great playwright and screenwriter, and he was the first Asian American playwright to win the Tony Award. That's the highest honor for an American playwright. And he won that for a play called M. Butterfly.
There was something about this topic which resonated for me, and that led me to, put it back in the hopper and let it percolate for a while until I popped up with a play.
And when David started reading those monologues from M. Butterfly, it just changed my life. I'd never heard anything like it. It was at that time, it was a game changer. It changed, I think it changed the theater world, certainly changed the Asian American theater and arts world. There was a TV show called Kung Fu, and as a kid, of course, I didn't realize that the person playing the main character was not Asian.
Time for you to leave.
Now it's very different, very problematic. But back then, just seeing this character on TV was like hit me like a ton of bricks. I didn't see anything like it. There was nothing like it on TV then. I mean, there's of course martial arts is an art, but the only times you would see Asian American heroes, if you will, were only through these martial arts things. And there's so much more to us than martial arts. And of course, not all Asians do martial arts either. So.
How do you like that?
And also just the whole depictions. It was okay to be. It was accepted then to really just put these Asians in very often racist, stereotypical, almost degrading roles.
Me love you long time.
And it was a conundrum. Like, of course, I understand actors want to work, so they had to do those roles. But I just felt it was up to the writers to really stop perpetuating these stereotypes. The first time I participated in an Asian American protest and felt the really Asian American political muscle and community and spirit here in New York City was I joined the early 90s Miss Saigon protests. These were protests led by the playwright David Henry Wong to combat the casting of a Caucasian, of an Asian person in a Eurasian role on Broadway.
You've had to have special makeup for all this. You've got to get the eyes out.
They don't go that way, Terry. They go this way. They're sort of.
We did it from both from a social but also a commercial standpoint. That it was just wrong to have this racist casting, but also from the artistic point of view, it took away a plum opportunity for an Asian American actor to grow in a Broadway role, and then to see that wow, we have a voice, we can make a difference. That meant a lot to me. We will not be denied. We will not be denied on the stage, in music, or on the streets. For an artist, for an activist, they say, the longest journey is going from 0 to 1. And being an artist and an activist, you are doing that all the time, going from 0 to 1. We made great progress, I felt like, as a culture, as a country. And then during the pandemic in 2020, then all of a sudden, we were right back to where it started. And with all the anti-Asian rhetoric, and then even worse, the anti-Asian attacks. So in some ways it got even worse, because growing up, I experienced a lot of Asian American bullying, but it was just verbal bullying. I didn't experience any physical attacks. And I think it was very strong for Asian Americans to take to the streets, and now our voices were heard by everyone by lifting up people. There would be a coalition of people from different ethnicities, different backgrounds, all protesting together. All these, sadly, it took tragedies like the murder of George Floyd and also all these anti-Asian hate attacks. It wasn't until the 2020s that all of a sudden at all these different protests you'd see people from all different groups, and that's been very uplifting. And with this time, a lot of things have been coming together for me as an artist too. Like writing my memoir was a big turning point too. Like it's called Our Laundry, Our Town: My Chinese American Life from Flushing to the Downtown Stage and Beyond. And that came out in hardcover in 2022, and then in a paperback in 2023. The book is really about finding your voice as a person and as an artist. And my journey to that came from again, two things happened. I was very lucky that as a teenager, after feeling like a misfit my whole life, the punk rock movement really gave me a place to fit in as a person, personally, but also artistically too. I started to write songs and play in punk rock bands. So I looked at that and then looking at how that led to my life on the stage. What became the book started as two solo performance pieces. One was called The Flushing Cycle, and one was called The Last Emperor of Flushing. So those two solo plays became the narrative basis for the book.
Their language, many would have even changed their appearance if they could, all just to get a whiff of that American dream.
You know, I grew up in the heroin chic 70s, and then I found out that my grandfather was an opium overdose as an indirect result of the opium wars. And in further research, of course, the opium wars changed China forever. It opened China to the West against her will. And then war was always complex, yet without that opium wars decimating China, I don't know if my grandfather would have been able to escape his extreme poverty and low status in China to come to New York. So I'm looking at those two things now, and I'm trying to do the same thing now with the stage piece is called Here Comes Johnny Yen Again, and I'm trying to work on that. And I'm very happy to say I'm going to be a New York Public Library Long-Term Fellow, so I'll be researching that book, expand that, and deepen it into a book called Urban Oracle Bones. So I guess I inevitably start off writing for the stage first, and then hopefully I adapt that into the page. And also, in some ways, diversity is a very complex thing. Like even now, like we want representation in our voices, but then also now as an Asian American writer, I don't want to be told you should only stay in your box and only stay in your lane and only create Asian American characters. I think true diversity needs to go that way. So just think, looking at arts in general, when there's not an exchange of cultures and exchange of ideas, we're dead, but I think it has to be a respectful exchange of ideas. I think it's great what the Asian American arts and activism movement has done to date, but I think moving in the future, it'll be interesting to see how it changes. Just as what it means to be an American has never been more complex and complicated, I like to think that same complexity and diversity will come to being what it means to be an Asian American as an activist and an artist.
To my grandfather, you might say opium was his punk rock. It was his show of defiance to his outsider status. This is how he processed his identity, how he processed his station, before there was Oriental party mix in this strange land known as the United States of America.